Hello, everyone. I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and this is my weekly reading of a chapter of my book, Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. That picture on the cover is my family. Three of my three kids, my German Shepherd, Nala, and my husband is not pictured, but we have lived on various catamarans over 10 years, more than that, since 2009, total of 5 years. So this book chronicles some of the adventures we've had living on a boat, two boats. One was called Hakuna Matata, and the other was the Dawn Treader. So each week I read a chapter of this book, and it's really appropriate this week because we are actually moving on to another catamaran, this time in the Mediterranean. All of these adventures took place in the US and in the Bahamas. So each week I read a new chapter. I'm actually wanted to show you where I am before I get started, or actually I'll show you at the end. I'm not at home, I'm not in New Mexico anymore, and I'm not on the boat yet. So that's a little hint of where I am. I'll show you at the end. So for now, let's read this week's chapter, and then afterwards, if people want to ask questions, let me know, and I'll be here. Okay, so here we go. This is Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, Chapter 21, Seasickness. When we are at a party or in some other social setting and the subject of living on a boat comes up, there is usually at least one person in the crowd who gets that certain look across their face. It seems to say, "What, are you insane?" It used to baffle me as I wondered how anyone could not only not dream of living on a boat, but be utterly repulsed by the idea. But the more time I have spent on boats, the more I think I now understand what that look really means, at least in about 9 out of 10 times. If you have ever had a bad case of seasickness, you recognize it too. One painful memory of getting sick over the guardrail is enough to turn anyone a bit sea green. The thought of all that motion on the ocean is a deal breaker for a lot of people. I suppose I'm one of the lucky few that can count on one hand the number of times I've gotten seasick. Ahava and Samuel got seasick even fewer times than that. Unfortunately, that was not the case for the rest of the Dawn Treader crew and her guests. We have had visitors on the calmest of days comment aloud that if they had known the seas were going to be so rough, they would never have gone out for the day. Even when you live on a boat full time, you might not be immune to seasickness. When Miss Linda lived aboard, she and Captain Nate always wore a scopolamine patch whenever we left the dock. Sometimes, in particularly uncomfortable seas, everyone had to take a little Dramamine to keep the low-level nausea at bay. While this is favorable to getting sick over the side, there are downsides to all these options. For example, Ziva still laments the time when we were on a charter boat in Mexico and the Dramamine we gave her made her so sleepy that she completely slept through a whale sighting. At the time, it seemed like the only way for her to avoid the usual awful seasickness. In hindsight, I would have given her a smaller dose or none at all, because some things just shouldn't be missed, no matter how green you might be. There is a lot of learning in hindsight that comes from living on a boat, and really from living life with kids in general. After seeing so many seasick loved ones on Hakuna Matata and the Dawn Treader, I feel like I can offer a little bit of good advice to avoid getting sick. The first and most important rule is never, ever go down below. Even if you aren't prone to seasickness, there is a good chance if you start out the voyage in one of the cabins near or below the waterline, you will end up losing your lunch. This was a fact that one of my friends learned the hard way as we got underway in rough seas while she was still lying in bed. We felt so bad for her as she never managed to make it out onto the top deck where she might actually have felt a bit better. And speaking of lunches, when everyone else was unable to do anything, that's when I was in the galley making lunch, which is funny for two reasons. One, I am not the cook in the family, and two, everyone else was too sick to eat anything. Being relatively immune from seasickness means I wasn't always the most sensitive to the fact that other people were turning green around me. Over time, I learned a few ways that I could help alleviate their suffering a little, but these only worked some of the time. The biggest thing was to figure out foods that could help settle their stomachs a bit. For this, I took a tip from my pregnancy playbook when I was sick as a dog for weeks on end with morning sickness. Back then, the only things that would help were either sour or bubbly. One day, when we invited our dear friends aboard, they brought a case of seltzer water, which seemed to help the queasy folks feel a little better. From then on, we always kept a supply of lime or grapefruit flavored fizzy drinks at the ready when we were on the water. The other thing I learned is that no one needed a heavy lunch, or breakfast for that matter, when we were underway. I usually cut up a bunch of fruit and brought a little up to the wave-weary crew at the helm deck throughout the day. I did what I could, but mostly everyone just wanted to be left alone, which, at the risk of sounding insensitive, I will say worked out nicely for me because I got to have the whole house to myself. On any given passage, you might find me cleaning the house, writing in my journals, or recording podcasts, because these are the things I rarely got the time to do when everyone was feeling like themselves. But even with my strong stomach, there was one time that I found myself sick as a dog. Another fun fact, dogs do get seasick too. This is something we learned with our first German Shepherd, Tova. It happened on Hakuna Matata on our last day in the Bahamas. We had just spent 4 months from Halloween through Ziva's February birthday in Hopetown on Elbow Key in the Abacos. We had made amazing friends on that island, and Ahava even went to school at Hopetown Primary School for a few months. It was so difficult for us to leave, but the time had come. On my very last night on that delightful island, several of my friends got together for a ladies' night out. Some of my favorite ladies joined me at Wine Down Sip Sip and Captain Jack's, where even at the time I knew I had had more than one too many. But as is often the case when alcohol is involved, I even took it a step further that night and insisted on introducing my friends to my favorite sipping tequila, Agavero. As I poured a taste from that agave plant-shaped bottle, I should have known that the planned 6 a.m. wake-up call for our launch might come a bit too early. At the time, it seemed like a good idea. I had searched for this fabulous tribe of like-minded women for so long that saying goodbye was really hard for me, and I made the very bad choice to drown my sorrows in alcohol. The next morning, I paid the price when Nathan launched at 6:30 a.m. as promised. As Hakuna Matata made its way out of Hopetown Harbor and into the Sea of Abaco for the last time, the waves began to roll. Outside the protection of the harbor, we hit the wind and the waves, and I started to regret every tequila shot I had done the night before. As the day wore on, I still felt awful while we made our way back through the Abacos and across the Little Bahama Bank to prepare for the trip back to Florida. Hour after hour, we rocked back and forth, and I felt something like the cat dragged in. I felt like something the cat dragged in. As much as I blamed myself for the life choices I made the night of my going away party, I was also very surprised at just how awful I felt and how long it lasted. This must be what seasickness feels like, I thought. No wonder people just lie there and act so miserable. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. Looking through my journal from that day, I found this entry written at 1:30 that afternoon. St. Patrick's Day, and then it's got the coordinates, left Hopetown at 6:30 a.m. yesterday morning with Don Marshall on board. After taking him to Boat Harbor Marina in Marsh Harbor to catch a flight back to Tucson, Arizona, we headed in the general direction of Great Guana Key, expecting to spend the night and continue toward Florida over several days. But reports on the cruiser's net were that the Whale Key cut was doable, so we chose to keep going since we know how dangerous that cut can be. Once safely through the Whale, it was a bit choppy and we all felt a little seasick. We chose not to stop at Green Turtle Key, Powell Key, or Spanish Key. Weather reports consistently showed our best option for crossing back to Florida was today. So, rather than risk the window closing, we chose to keep going. Last night, around midnight, we anchored for about 6 hours near the northernmost part of Great Sail Key. After getting some sleep, we continued west, following the rum lines past Mangrove Key and Memory Rock into the deep blue Atlantic Ocean. We haven't had much wind for sailing, but if all things stay the same, we should reach Lake Worth Inlet by around 6 p.m. Although I didn't sound too bad in this journal entry, you can definitely tell I was looking forward to getting the Atlantic crossing behind us and setting foot back on dry land. But that line, if all things stay the same, was apparently regarded as a challenge by King Triton. Soon after I wrote that, we left the relative protection of Memory Rock and said goodbye to our beloved Bahamas. The storm that wasn't supposed to move in until the next day suddenly swept in about 12 hours early. Now, not only was I miserably seasick or hungover or both, I was also starting to worry about the safety of my family, including a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. We had moved from just rocking to rocking, rolling, and pounding, and what is not so affectionately called confused seas. We were hitting the waves so hard that the faucets kept turning on, and we resorted to putting weights on the faucet handles to keep them in the closed position. We were trying to get to the Lake Worth Inlet so that we could enjoy the protection of the Peanut Island anchorage by nightfall. But the Gulf Stream and the storm just kept pushing against our little boat, and we were moving at a snail's pace. Already 10 hours into our planned 6-hour crossing, and we were still hours from shore. Finally, Captain Nate made an executive decision to stop fighting the current and just let it take us northward to wherever we could make landfall the fastest. That proved to be a good decision, and we made our way to Florida. Here's the boat log entry I wrote in the wee hours of the morning, once we were safely anchored and everyone else was asleep. March 18th, 2010, 3:30 a.m. What a difference a few minutes makes. After I wrote that we thought we would be in Lake Worth Inlet by 6 p.m., the wind died down and the seas picked up. We got pounded and pounded and pounded for hours. It was just awful. Our speed dropped from about 6.5 knots to 3.5 or less. We just sat in this area and took a terrible beating. It was scary for the girls and scary for us. We all felt quite battered and green. Poor Tova, the dog, kept going down to the sugar scoop, searching for some respite or escape, but there just was none to be had. In the end, we pulled into the Lake Worth Inlet around 8 o'clock or 8:30 p.m. and managed to find a decent anchorage just south of Peanut Island and the inlet. We are safe, and other than a broken wine glass that was sacrificed to the sea, we are intact. But none of us will ever forget that crossing, which ranks in the top 2 worst experiences on Hakuna Matata so far. Ironically, the other also happened off the coast of West Palm Beach when our steering went out and the seas were pounding us and my cousin's husband, Dewey Guzman, was seasick. That time we had to be towed in to the tune of $700. To say we were glad to be anchored is a huge understatement. Once we dropped anchor, we were also relieved to be back in the calm, protected harbor. Normally, all seasickness would disappear the minute we got out of the open sea. That is certainly what happened with the rest of the crew, but not for me. I still felt awful long after we landed. It wasn't until the next day, after a trip to Walgreens, that I figured out why. Yes, I had been hungover. Yes, I probably had a bit of seasickness, but I probably should have recognized that old, familiar feeling of morning sickness. 8 months later, despite his rocky, tequila-soaked start, we were delighted to welcome healthy baby Samuel to this crazy crew. And that is chapter 21, Seasickness of Losing Sight of the Shore, How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, even before your family is born. So I hope you enjoyed that chapter about seasickness. I wanted to quickly show you where I am. I'm at my friend's house. So we are on our way to the boat. My husband, Nathan, and my son, Samuel, are already on the boat in Spain, going up the coast of Spain. Ironically, with that chapter that I just read, Samuel actually is very seasick now and miserable and having a horrible time. So I guess I jinxed it with this chapter where I said, oh, he doesn't get seasick. Apparently he does. He's 13 now, by the way. So I thought I would show you because we have had a delay. Ziva, Nala, and I are heading to Spain, but we've had a delay because of Nala's paperwork. So Ziva and I are taking the opportunity, thanks to our amazing friends who have been willing to watch Nala. Well, we came up to New York City to go see a Broadway play. So let me show you my view right now. Just looking out at the Hudson River. I don't know if you can see that, but it's amazing. So that is where I am. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. And if you are interested in following our adventures in the next few weeks, I promise to get caught up on my Substack. That's where I will share more of my writing, both related to the boat, and I'm actively finishing up a series of thrillers that are going to be published later this year. So if you want some preview, just go to rosalindaroman.substack.com. Thank you very much for checking out my live stream. I'll be back, assuming everything goes well and I've landed safely in Spain. I'll try to do a live this time next week. All right. Thank you so much for being here. And if you liked this, please feel free to share it with a friend. All right. Take care. Bye.